Hello my friends, it's Ranger Russ from the Meigs Point Nature Center, and we are doing a very special program for the Girl Scouts today. So all the Girl Scouts that love state parks, there are several of them here with me today, and for those of you that are out there, I'm going to give you a chance to all log in because it takes a little while to log in. But we're going to be doing a beach program today, and we're still waiting for people to log in. I'm going to turn so you can see the beach behind me. So there's our beach. That's what we're going to be talking about today. And let's see, there you are. So we're going to be out here. Now, with the beach program, we are not talking about things that live on a beach. We're talking about things that you find on a beach. And most of those things are things that live in Long Island Sound. So what we're talking about today are animals, not just animals, but living things from Long Island Sound that wash up onto the beach, or we're also going to run a net and see what kinds of things we can catch. But this is basically the life in Long Island Sound, what we're going to be talking about today. So for the most part, I'm going to be in front of the camera. Right now I'm technically behind the camera. I have a volunteer here today that's going to work the camera, and a staff person that's going to help me with the net. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to flip the camera around, if I can find the button. And Paul is going to take over the camera. You have to keep it tipped like that so that this doesn't hit this. Okay. Otherwise, see how it's shaking? Keep it at an angle like that. All right, so what we're going to do, we're going to head down to the beach and talk about the things that are washing up on the beach first. So you guys can come along as well. Yeah, you got it. All right, so it looks like a beautiful day today. There's a breeze off the water. Temperature, I don't know, I'd say low 70s. It is really gorgeous though. So, this looks like a good place for us to set up. Now, for those of you that are out there virtually, I'm going to ask you the question, but you're not going to be able to participate. But what we're going to be doing first is beach combing. So how many of you that are here have done beach combing before? You know, walk along the beach and look for cool things. Everybody does it. We do it all the time. That's what we're going to do right here. But it's more than just looking for cool things. Okay? What I want to do is set a challenge for you. And the challenge is, can you find 5 or more things that were alive that are washed up on the beach? That's different things, not all the same shell or the same kind of seaweed. So the rack line, these are these lines of debris left from the high tides. The farthest one out is the last high tide. The middle one, that's really the average high tides. Most of them come there. And then way up here, we have the extreme high tide that we usually only get a couple of times a month. So obviously the most things are going to be found right along in this high tide line here, this rack line. So why don't we take a few minutes and we're going to do some beach combing and see if we can find 5 different things that were alive. Okay? So what are you guys looking for? What might you find? What's that? Crab claws? Yeah, you'll probably find a crab claw. What else might you find? Anybody? Seaweed. You'll find some seaweed. You can see a lot of seaweed here. Anything else you think that is going to be here?
Some things that were in shells.
Yep, the shells or the parts of the animals that were in shells. All right, why don't we take a few minutes and just, we don't have to go very far. I'm seeing a lot of different things. See if you can find 5 different things. And I'm going to put the microphone here just for now because I'm going to be looking for things as well. Actually, I think I can hold it. All right, let's go to this rack line here. So first of all, yeah, it just has to pour on its own. Joystick, there you go. Right here we have a juvenile gull. This is a herring gull, and these gulls will turn the beautiful white and gray that you think of when you typically see a gull, but for the first couple of years they're going to be all brown. This one's pretty dark, so this is a very young one, and they'll get lighter as time goes on. There's a more mature one down there. That's actually, though, a ring-billed gull. All right, so let's go right here, and we're going to see what sorts of things have washed up on the beach. So I'm just going to look, see if I can find 5 different things. All right, I've got 3, 4. All right, this is actually an easy day. Maybe I should have set the number higher today. There's a lot of things to find here. All right, let's, I know that I can find other things that I haven't found yet, so I'm gonna keep on looking. Now, right here, I'm gonna draw 2 circles, okay? One circle are for the things that you find that you think belong on the beach, and then we're gonna draw a circle if you find things that you think don't belong on the beach, they can go in a circle too. All right, so I draw the second circle and then we draw a line through it for things that don't belong here. And that's usually going to be pollution. We do find some trash when we're doing this program. How many things do you think you guys found so far? Anybody have 5 yet? Do you have 5, you think? Yeah, you have 5 too? Yeah. Do you guys think you got 5? You're not sure?
Well, I don't know. I think I lost one.
All right. If you guys want to come up and gather around, you can put your things in this circle here, and then we're going to talk about the different things that we found. And Tiffany, can you bring me the shell bucket and this bin right here? Very cool. And then we're going to pull the net and see what sorts of things we can find. I'm looking to see if there's something I don't know what it is, because that happens sometimes. Hasn't happened in a while, but... All right, so let's take a look at what everyone found. Let's start right here. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 on that one. Is this yours too? We'll just throw that in. There's 8. Actually, this is part of that, so that's definitely 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Oh no, those are the same. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I knew I should have put the number higher. And that is 8 there. And we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right, so everybody found at least 5 things that were alive. And let's start out, which one are we going to talk about first? So this one here, these are actually the same. These are called red beard sponges, okay? So this is a sponge. If you think of when you go down south, if you've ever been down to like a coral reef, there are also sponges that grow in with the corals. Here in Long Island Sound, we do get corals. They're hard to find, usually not very big, and also not very colorful. But our sponges get pretty large and are very colorful. They call them a red beard sponge. They're never going to be red. They're actually really bright orange when they're alive, and then they eventually fade to this green color once they've been out on the beach for a while. The reason they call them a red beard sponge, years ago, scientists don't really recognize the color red, the color orange. If it's orange, they always just called it red. So that's how it got the name red beard sponge. All right, next we have actually two creatures on the same shell, and this is the same one here. And does anyone recognize these shells? No? This is an oyster shell. Now, what do we get from oysters? What do we get? Food. How many of you guys eat oysters? Anybody here eat oysters? You like oysters? Okay, one out of the group. Did you raise your hand, Tiffany? I don't know if Tiffany likes oysters or not. But, okay, so oysters, they live in Long Island Sound, and they do produce food, but they also produce pearls. Now, the oysters in Long Island Sound do not produce the beautiful white round pearl that you think of when you think of pearls. Our oysters produce these brown, gray, some white in there mixed in, kind of lumpy, not really smooth, not really round pearls. They do produce pearls, but they're not like the jewelry quality pearls. But they do live in Long Island Sound, and these are what are considered a bivalve, which just means bi means two, and a valve is another name for the shell. So these are two-shelled animals, and we're going to talk a lot about bivalves as we go forward, because that's a lot of the things that can wash up on our beach. The other thing that's very interesting that's growing on the back here, these are actually slipper snails, or the remains of slipper snail shells, and this is a slipper snail. So they would start growing on the back there. This is a slipper. But let's talk slipper snails for a second, because this might be the craziest thing that I tell you today. Now, oysters can actually turn from boys to girls. When they start out, when they're seed oysters, very small oysters, the percentage is actually higher for males than it is for females. But then as they mature, many of them will change over to females, and then as adults you get about 50-50 males to females. These are a bit different. The slipper snails, kind of crazy. So if a slipper snail is growing on something, now this is an unusual snail because most snails can move around. These snails stay attached, just like the oyster. Once it's attached, that's it. It spends its whole life in one place. So we always say real estate is very important for an oyster. Where they choose to live, very important. It's also important for the slipper snail. So this snail begins to grow. At first, it's not a boy or a girl, okay? But when another one comes along and attaches, because they grow in colonies, one stacked on top of the other. Another one comes along and starts growing on the top of that one. That first one turns into a girl. The second one turns into a boy. Now, a third one comes along, because they do get a colony. You can have, 12, a stack of 12 or more. This third one comes along, starts growing on the back of that boy. The boy turns into a girl. The one on top turns into a boy. And that will continue to happen as the stack gets taller and taller. The ones on the bottom are going to be girls. The ones in the middle are turning from boys to girls, and the ones on the top are going to be boys. If one dies and floats away off of the top of the stack, that one that was a boy that turned into a girl will turn back into a boy until another one comes along and lands on its back, and then the one that was a boy that turned into a girl that turned back into a boy will turn back into a girl. So they have to keep that stack going with the boys on the top and the girls on the bottom, and that's how this colony grows. Is that fascinating? It is absolutely one of the coolest things that I have ever learned about creatures that live in Long Island Sound. Okay, let's move on and talk about another bivalve. This is a pretty good one here. Let's see if I can open it. This is a blue mussel. And the blue mussels are called that because of the nice color that you get on the inside. Does anybody eat mussels? No? Well, if you do eat mussels, you will find sometimes that they have something called a beard. And that's made up of small threads. And that beard is actually, those threads are called Bissell Threads. Bissell Threads are stronger than steel. If you could stretch steel as thin as a Bissell thread, the Bissell thread would be stronger. A really amazing thing that these do, when they attach themselves to a rock with their Bissell threads, if they need to move, they can actually move. They will stretch out new Bissell threads, attach them farther along the rock, release the old threads, and pull themselves over to their new location. Sounds kind of like Spider-Man, right? When he shoots out a web and pulls himself over, except this happens in super slow motion, because it could take 15 minutes to go from here to here. So they move pretty slowly, but they can move around the rock using their Bissell threads. And again, people eat these. So we've got oysters and we've got mussels. These are both bivalves, 2 shells. And now we have another bivalve. This is a transverse arc. We have one over here. And we're going to talk about both of these. So with these clams, you can tell a little bit with the oysters, you can tell with the mussels, you can tell how old they are by their growth rings. You can see the ridges on here. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, maybe 6. So this one is probably 5 or 6 years old. This is in the clam family. This is a transverse arc. It's called that because most clams, and let me grab a clam shell out here if I can find one. So most clams, the hinge curves with the shape of the shell. With the arc, and it's transverse because the hinge transverses the hinge, so it makes a straight line across the hinge. So this is another bivalve that lives in Long Island Sound. Now, since I showed you this clam, let's talk about this one. This is a quahog. People eat lots of clams along the coast here of Connecticut, and they have different names, but they're usually going to be the quahogs. If you've ever had cherry stones, that's just a small quahog. But these were used by the Native Americans. They have a nice, really thick shell. They also have that purple on the inside. Show everyone out there the purple. Okay. So what they would do with these is they would carve the thick shell into beads, and that was called wampum. And they could get purple beads or they could get white beads. Obviously, the purple beads are harder to find because much less of the shell is purple. And if you carve in here, you're going to have the purple disappear pretty quickly. So the ones that were more purple were a little more valuable than the ones that were more white. But they would use these beads to decorate, to make jewelry, and then they could trade those. It was not money, it was a trade product that they would make and then trade for other things. But the quahog, this is a very thick, hard shell. It is not the largest clam that we get in Long Island Sound. The largest clam that we get is a surf clam. Have you guys ever seen a clam that big? That's a pretty big clam, right? They get bigger than this. They can get almost 9 inches. So about that big is how big a surf clam can get. And this is the largest clam on the coast of Connecticut. This is the largest one that you'll be able to find. One of the ways that you can tell a quahog from a surf clam, and we'll show everyone out there this as well, if you look at these shells, the umbo, I love that word, the umbo on a surf clam is pretty close to the center of the clam shell. On a quahog, it's really lopsided and it points to one side or the other. So that's a good way, if they're the same size, which sometimes they are, you'll be able to tell by the shape of the shell. Okay, can you see how that one's far more pointed in that direction? This one's pointed up and closer to the center. All right, so surf clam versus quahog. And this is how big quahogs get too. They get bigger even than that one. All right, let's move on and look at Other things that you found, let's talk about this for a second. So we found a bit of, this looks like Spartina or cordgrass, which grows out in our salt marsh, and it does occasionally wash up on the beach. It's on the backside over there, but it does get washed out into the sound when the tide goes out, and then when the tide comes back in, it gets washed up on our beach. So we do find this occasionally. We found, who said that they thought they might find a crab claw? So you actually found one. This is from, do you know what kind of crab that's from? You see the color on the inside there? A blue crab, that's right. So the blue crabs usually, not always, have a nice blue tint to their shell and to their claws. The males sometimes get really orange in their claws as well. Something really neat about the blue crab, and I'm not sure if I have a blue crab shell, but the blue crab is one of the few crabs in Long Island Sound that can swim. So most crabs, they have 8 legs, and they are all walking legs. They're all pointed legs. The blue crab has 6 pointed or walking legs and 2 legs that are flattened into paddles so that they can swim. The other crab that can swim is a lady crab. And I don't think I've got either. Oh, here we do. We do have a blue crab shell. Okay. So you can notice the points on the end. This one here is broken off. But those points, that's what gives it away right away, no matter what the color. Only the blue crab has these great big points that are sticking out on the sides. Can you read the screen if anybody has any questions? Can you read them?
I haven't gotten a question yet, except about beach combing. They found a plastic hair comb at that seining event.
Yeah. Oh, I remember that. With me? Yeah, I think that was with me. All right, let's keep going. You guys ever found a really colorful, pretty, shiny shell like those? Okay, this is the jingle shell. They come in 3 different colors. They come in this beautiful yellow, they come in an orange color, and then they come in a black color that looks like a really dirty fingernail or something like that. Or if you shut your finger in a door when it turns purple and black. These are also called mermaid's toenails. I don't know if that's very attractive, if that's a good thing or a bad thing. But, and this is another bivalve. Usually you only find half of the shell because like the oyster, the other half they attach to a rock, and when they die, this half floats away and the other half stays attached to the rock. So most of the time you're only going to find one side of a jingle. Let me see if I can find an orange one. I don't see an orange one in our bin here. All right, let's move on and talk about, well, I missed this crab. We have another crab here. This is called a spider crab, or a cooler name for me is the decorator crab. Okay, so what this crab will do is it will go into an area where there is seaweed. It will pluck the seaweed and stick it to its back. Okay, and then it walks around with the seaweed on its back. Why do you think it needs to do that or wants to do that? What does it help it do if it's got seaweed stuck to its back? Do you know what it's called?
Camouflage?
Camouflage. This crab can camouflage with whatever it decorates its shell with. So they call them decorator crabs because they intentionally camouflage themselves. Now, we have caught these and brought them back and put them in a tank in the nature center. And they just start plucking off the seaweed and eating it. And then they'll look for new seaweed and attach it to the back. And we're going to talk about seaweed here for a second because seaweed does something pretty neat. We get different types of seaweed in Long Island Sound. And I think we only have one kind here. Well, here's one. All right, so we have 2 different kinds of seaweed. So this is sargassum. Let me make sure. No, this is rockweed. Sargassum and rockweed look very similar. Now, rockweed usually grows on, you guys know, I just said it in the name. It grows on rocks, right. So rockweed will typically grow on rocks, and it gets these little sacs of mostly nitrogen gas that keep it floating. And that way it doesn't get bashed against the rocks as much, and it gets closer to the sun when the tide is covering it. It gets closer up there and it can get more sunlight. But it also has, in these ones with little bumps, those produce the spores or seeds so that they can be released and grow new ones. Now, the 3 different types of seaweed we get in Long Island Sound, we get green seaweed, we get red seaweed, and we get brown seaweed. Green seaweed, which I'm really surprised we didn't find any, and I'm not seeing any green seaweed around us, that grows in the shallowest water. In the deeper water, you get brown seaweed, and then in deeper water still, you'll get red seaweed. They used to think that that was because sunlight, the different waves of light, different colors, reach different depths, and that determined the colors of the seaweed. Then they discovered that it had nothing to do with sunlight at all. It's nitrogen levels. There are different nitrogen levels at different depths, and somehow that triggers the seaweeds to be different colors. Because this is Irish moss, which is normally when it's alive, it's going to be a red seaweed. Thank you, Tiffany. But sometimes it will be green. And Tiffany did find us a piece of, look at that, there's a shell stuck to it. A little slipper snail stuck to the back of that. This is sea lettuce. This is a green sea lettuce or seaweed. And like the name says, it looks a lot like lettuce. They put it in seaweed salad. And if you've ever gotten those dried, flat, dark green seaweed chips or seaweed sheets that you just eat it, that is usually this kind of seaweed right here. And I think they sell it as by the scientific name, which is ulva. So if you see ulva, that's a green seaweed. And those again are usually in the shallowest water. Now, the Irish moss, I love talking about Irish moss because this one, you guys actually put this in your mouth this morning. How many of you guys put this in your mouth this morning? You put this in your mouth and you rub it all around every morning and every night. At least I hope you do. This is in toothpaste, okay? So when you read the ingredients of your toothpaste, it's not going to say Irish moss or seaweed or algae, because seaweed is really algae. It's going to say carrageenan. So if you look at the ingredients of your food or your toothpaste and you see carrageenan, that's where it comes from, okay? So it's also in things like salad dressing, some puddings and jellos, boxed baking mixes like brownie mixes or cookie mixes very often have it. It's also in ice cream and McDonald's shakes, and it just makes things thicker. It's in a lot of makeup, and it helps the makeup stay thick. So that's what the Irish moss or the carrageenan is used for, and this is what it comes from. So how many of you are going to brush your teeth tonight because you know where it comes from? You're still good with it? That's good. I was told one time that I shouldn't tell kids that because then they won't want to brush their teeth, but I think it's important to know that. All right, let's keep going. Oh, and I just moved my leg and I found another bit of green algae. This is a little bit of, it looks like a tube weed or a gut weed. It's very hard to tell when it's all dried out like that, but sometimes the green algae grow in these long tubes that they call gut weed. And then sometimes tube weeds can actually also be red, and they're called pirate's beard when they're red, pirate's beard or red man's beard, and when they're green, it's called mermaid's hair. So you guys see a theme going here? We've got mermaid's hair, we've got their toenails. What other parts of a mermaid are we going to find today? All right, let's keep going. What have I not talked about yet? I see one thing. I think only one thing. Oh, an acorn. I found an acorn that washed up. And that happens. You know, they get washed down rivers. That's basically what driftwood is. It gets washed out from upland, either down a river or just a tree that falls into Long Island Sound. and then it drifts around for a while, washes back up on the beach, and now it's all bleached out and looks really neat. The acorn, this one just looks like it's been floating around for a really long time. Now, one of you found this, and this is really cool. Does anybody know what this is from? A horseshoe crab, very good. So this is part of a horseshoe crab, and this is the tail of a horseshoe crab. And most people think that the horseshoe crab uses this to sting or stab. It cannot sting or stab with the tail. And I did bring out a horseshoe crab. Actually, I have two out here. This is going to be a pretty large horseshoe crab. And when you find a horseshoe crab this big, or even bigger, because they do get larger than this, that's going to be a girl. So the girls get much larger than the boys in the horseshoe crab world. And this one we can't tell for sure what it is. It's small, so it could be a boy or it could be a girl. The way that you can tell for sure, if you look on the underside, you see they have legs. They have 10 legs. How many legs do crabs have? What did I say earlier? 8 legs. This has 10 legs. So technically, horseshoe crabs are not crabs. But if you look here, the first set of legs for the girls are going to come to a point. The boys, it's like a fist with a hook on it. So we call it the boxing glove, and it has a little hook on it. And that's how you can tell the boys from the girls when they have their legs. When they're this size and the legs have all fallen out, it could be a boy or it could be a small girl, a girl that hasn't grown up yet. This one has an interesting mutation, and we find this occasionally with a forked tail. So that does happen sometimes. Another fascinating thing about the horseshoe crabs is that they have blue blood. Now, they're not the only animals that have blue blood, because lobsters and crabs also have blue blood. But do you guys know what makes your blood red? Do you know why your blood is red? Yes, go ahead. Oxygen, when it hits, do you know what's in it that turns it red? When it hits iron. So your blood is loaded with iron. And when oxygen hits iron, it oxidizes and turns it bright red. Their blood is based on copper, and copper turns a blue or a green color. For them, it's usually purple, and then when it's exposed to air, it turns a bright blue. So their blood is based on copper, and it does something else that's really special. Their blood will produce a goo. So our blood, if we get something bad in it, we have white blood cells that attack whatever it is that's foreign that doesn't belong there. Their blood doesn't have that. They don't have any white blood cells. They produce a goo that surrounds whatever it is that doesn't belong, and they just surround it in that goo.
I have a quick question here from Ann.
Yep.
It says, what is the horseshoe crab tail used for?
Oh, good question. I mentioned that it was not used as a stinger. What it is used for, if the horseshoe crab ends up upside down, they can turn themselves over using their tail. They flip their tail and turn themselves back over. The way that they end up being upside down is because that is how they swim. When they get up into the water column, they will flip over and swim upside down using their tail as a rudder. And then sometimes they'll end up upside down on the ground before they get flipped back over, or just a wave will turn them over, and then they use their tail to right themselves. So not a weapon, not a stabbing implement. It is just to turn themselves over. They will raise their tail if something comes at them really quickly. They will raise their tail, and hopefully they get poked and will move away. These little spines on the side, those are just to try and keep things from eating it. So really all of its things are defensive. It doesn't have any claws that can really hurt you. They're little soft pinchers. I've been pinched by all of them. They don't really hurt. Their mouth, if you look inside here, all of these little teeth are the mouth. They don't hurt either. They can't really bite with that mouth. They use that mouth to grind up whatever it is they want to eat, which is anything they eat off of the bottom. So they'll find dead things. If they find like a sea squirt or a cucumber, a sea cucumber, they'll eat those as well. So they're eating things that they find off the bottom. Another amazing thing about the horseshoe crabs is that they have 9 eyes. There are 2 eyes here, 2 eyes here, 3 eyes up here, and 2 eyes by the back of the tail. So they end up with 9 eyes, which is really fascinating. They also have light sensors in other places that just tell light from dark. So that's a really fascinating creature. All right, let's move on. Is there anything that anyone found that we didn't talk about? I don't think so. I do want to talk about another snail for a second before we go run the net, because we really need to get out there and start running this net. If you want to pull the net out and start stretching it out. All right, so we talked about the clams are in the bivalve. So we've got oysters, mussels, clams. Oh, the last bivalve are actually, anyone recognize those? Scallops. And people eat these as well. So all of the bivalves people do eat. But what else eats clams, oysters, mussels, and scallops are whelk snails. Now people see this and they think it's a conch. A conch is a southern snail and they are herbivores. So they only eat plants. Whelks are carnivores. They only eat bivalves. The way they eat a bivalve, so we have a bivalve, imagine that this actually has 2 shells. The whelk will move along until it finds its bivalve. It will suction itself onto the bivalve using its suction cup, and then it takes the edge of its shell and it pries open the clam. It just sticks it in there until the clam can't hold itself closed any longer. It has to open its shell just a tiny bit, and then the snail will stick its foot. So a snail's scientific name is gastropod, which gastro means stomach and pod means foot. So they are literally stomach foot. They stick their foot inside there and digest the clam. They release their digestive acids and digest the clam inside of its own shell. Now, if you were going to eat the same way that the whelk eats the clam, the way you would do that, let's say, how many of you guys like to eat pizza? You like pizza? Okay, so you are going to eat a pizza the way the clam gets eaten by the whelk. You would take the pizza and you would leave it in the box. You would open it up a tiny bit and you would secrete or spray your digestive acids from your stomach all over the pizza until it begins to liquefy, and then you would drink the pizza out of the box after it's already digested. Okay? So that's really how the whelk eats the clam. Do you guys still want to eat pizza? No. All right. I guess I shouldn't have told that story like that. All right. And then the last thing I want to show you before we run the net, have you seen anything like this? This is a Welk Egg Case. So these whelks, this particular one is a knobbed whelk, which is the largest snail in Long Island Sound. They will lay these long strings, and this is actually not. This is from a knobbed whelk. This is from a channeled whelk. This is from a knobbed whelk. So this one came from this. They will lay these long strings up to 3 feet long. Each one of these little pouches can hold up to 80 baby whelks. They turn from an egg to a tiny snail, which will look exactly like this, but be about the size of a grain of sand. They emerge out the size of a grain of sand, and in 21 years get to be this big. So they live pretty long time.
You want to cut one open?
No, we need to run the net.
All right.
All right, so any questions about the things that we found out here today? You guys excited to see what we catch in the net? 'Cause I'm really curious to find out what we're going to find. Oh, I did bring this out. You know what that is? This is a lobster's claw. Now, you are not going to find a lobster with a claw this big in Long Island Sound. This came from north, either Canada or up in Maine. And this lobster probably weighed 25, 30 pounds. They can live over 100 years. Now, if we found one that big down here in Long Island Sound, that would have to be like 200 years old, because they don't grow as big or as fast in Long Island Sound, where the water is a little warmer and there's not as much food. They like the cold water, which is one of the reasons why we don't find lobsters in the Sound anymore, because the Sound has gotten too warm for them. But that's a crazy lobster claw right there. And then sea stars. We used to find sea stars in Long Island Sound. We don't really find them any longer. And again, they like colder water. So this is a northern sea star. You find them north of here. We really were just about their southernmost part of their range. And now we don't find them any longer. So they're up north of us. Another interesting thing about them, they have 2 stomachs. So, you know something else that has more than 1 stomach? Anybody? Cows. Cows have multiple stomachs as well. Okay. I think Tiffany is ready over there with the net. So I'm going to leave the mic here. Now we're going to pull the net. At first we'll go down and we'll pull the net towards the jetty, see what we catch. We'll have a bucket over there. If we catch anything, it can go in the bucket. If there are things in the net, you can help me by taking the things out and putting them in the bucket. But I have a few things I'm going to ask. First, that you don't step on the net, because you might put a hole in it. And it's hard to catch things if there's a hole in the net. And the other thing is that you wet your hands before you pick up the animals. Dry hands, you might stick to the fish and maybe take their scales off or rub their slime off. So if you wet your hands, you can help us pick up the animals and put them in the net. All right, you guys excited to see what we find? All right, I'm gonna leave the microphone here and leave the bucket over that way. You guys learn anything so far? All right.
how cold is that water?
Not bad at all.
Not bad at all.
You guys want to help? I see one fish already. Yeah, let's another one. What you can do, again, don't step on the net, but if you start looking through this seaweed, you may find a lot more things than we see in the original. See that bright orange there? Remember the red beard sponge we talked about? That's how bright they are when they're alive. So they start to lose their color after they've been on the beach for a while. All right, there's something interesting. All right, so found a few things. How much time do we have? Anybody have the time?
Well,
Okay, so we might have time to run the net again. What I'm going to do, Tiffany, you want to grab that the jar that we put the show things? Okay, so let me grab out and show you add a little tiny crab. You would think they wouldn't be able to hide that well in the bucket. Remember the seaweed we talked about? There's some nice fresh sea lettuce there. So sea lettuce, when it's fresh, you can just rinse it off and eat it. There's the crab. All right. How many of you have heard of an invasive species? So an invasive species, there's two requirements to be an invasive species. Number one, you're not from this area. And number two, you're harmful to this area. So these are Asian shore crabs. They are from Asia. And they came over in the bilge water of cargo ships, were pumped out onto the shore in New Jersey in the early to mid 90s, and now have spread from Mexico to Canada. So we have them all up and down the coast now. When they first arrived here in Connecticut, they were found on the sandy beach, on the rocky shore, in the salt marsh. They were really everywhere. They've now narrowed it down so they're mostly only found in the rocky areas. Okay, so this one was probably hanging out because it's near the jetty. Now, we saw some crabs over there a little bit, but this is a crab shell. You can see very tiny. The Asian shore crab is pretty tiny itself, but this is not from a dead crab. And I can tell that because it is very thin. The color is very pale. If it were a crab that died, the color would be more the color of a live one and the shell would be thicker. This is from a crab molt. So crabs will shed their exoskeleton. They don't have internal bones. They have a skeleton outside of their body. And if you think of that exoskeleton kind of like Iron Man armor, okay? So if you had, each of you had a suit of Iron Man armor, that'd be pretty cool, right? First of all. But why would you ever have to take off your suit of armor? There's only one reason you ever have to take it off. Why would you take it off? How often do you guys need a new pair of shoes? Pretty regularly? Why do you need to get a new pair of shoes a lot of times? Because your feet grow. So if you were in a suit of Iron Man armor and you were trying to grow, the armor doesn't grow. So you would have to take off the armor and get a new suit of armor. That's what the crab does. It sheds its exoskeleton, it sheds off the armor, it opens up the back, pulls its legs and its claws out, leaves the armor behind. Now it's soft, but things can eat it, so it has to stay hidden. In a couple of days, for a small crab like this, it's only very short time, it will harden back in, the skin will harden back into the armor, but over that period that it's soft, it's able to grow bigger. That great big lobster that we looked at over there, those only shed like once every 3 years. A little crab like this is probably shedding once every 3 months. So they shed much more often when they're trying to grow faster, when they're younger. So, all right, let's take a look. Let me move this over here. And where did I put the net? There it is. And I'm gonna show you guys in here the fish that we caught. So let's do the small one first, if I can catch it here. And we'll drop that right in there. All right, here we have an Atlantic silver side. Can you see the shininess on the side of that fish? You guys see that? So this fish is very, very shiny. It has a silver stripe down the side of it. If you look at this fish from the bottom, it's very, very white. And then it has that silver stripe. If you look at it from the top, what color is it if you look at it from the top? Is it sort of a greenish color? Right? Kind of like the same color as the water if you look down in the water. If you look up from the water, you're looking at a very bright or shiny surface. This fish has something very special called bilateral camouflage. Very big word, but it's really simple. Bi means two, just like a bivalve has two shells. Bilateral means it has two lines of camouflage. It has camouflage from the top. It's the same color as if you look down into the water. And from the bottom, it's the same color as you look up. So if this fish is swimming along and there's a big fish looking up to hunt for it, it will blend in with the surface. And if there's a bird flying over the top of the water looking down, it's going to blend in with the bottom. So this fish has camouflage from the top or the bottom. So that's called bilateral camouflage. And actually, in World War II, when people first started using planes in war, they originally painted their planes really bright, crazy colors like yellow and red and everything. And then they learned, and over time they started painting their planes brown and green on the top and blue and white on the bottom to try and help camouflage. All right, we have another fish that we're going to look at. This is, I'm pretty sure it's a shad. It's called a Hickory Shad, is one of the names for it. Shad or bunker. I'm trying to remember. There are lots of names. Fishermen make a lot more names than we need sometimes. They call things a lot of different names. But this fish, they used to harvest these, thousands and thousands of them, because they are a very oily fish. And a long time ago, they used to use the oil to burn lanterns, and they would use it to lubricate machines, because oil is very slippery. So they used the fish oil a lot. So they extracted the oil out of the fish, and then they ground the rest of the fish up and used it for fertilizer, because the ground up fish makes really good fertilizer. And we're actually finding more and more of these fish. They're starting to come back. Last year we had a great year. Or actually 2 years ago, was the most we've ever had in Connecticut. So lots and lots of these fish. And now if you notice, do they have the same kind of camouflage? If you look at the top of that fish, it's much darker, isn't it, than the side of the fish? Look how much darker that is if you look at it from the top. So many of the small fish that we find in Long Island Sound have that bilateral camouflage. It really helps them to blend in. Do we have any questions? Again, if you're watching on Facebook, if you have any questions, you can post them up at any time, and Paul will try and ask me. All right, let's There's a cool red algae. So this is called Dulse. Sometimes it's so thin you can read through it. Now, all the algae that lives in Long Island Sound that's native to Long Island Sound is actually edible. If I had some fresh water, I would wash this off and eat it. Any one of these, you could eat this too. Now, I do not suggest when you find algae on the beach just picking up and eating it. You do have to clean it first. But one of the things that you can do with the Irish moss, remember I talked about this one that's in your toothpaste? At the Nature Center, if we can collect enough fresh, I'm trying to remember the recipe. So 2 cups of Irish moss seaweed, 2 cups of milk, and like a half a cup of sugar. You boil it together, then you strain out the seaweed and let it sit. You can put flavoring, we usually use vanilla flavoring, and you make pudding, seaweed pudding. So really simple. I'll make sure, I think the recipe is already up on our website. So if you go to meigspointnaturecenter.org, the virtual learning center, I have a whole video on, and I think we have the recipe right next to that. So if we don't, we'll have to get that up there. All right, I don't know how much time we have left.
About 3 minutes.
About 3 minutes. Anybody have any questions? Did you guys have fun? All right, how many of you that are doing the Girl Scout program are going to try and do one of the other ones virtually today? Or is this it? You're going to hang out here the rest of the day and enjoy the sunlight? I think you should enjoy the beach. It's a really beautiful day here today. All right. No questions on the virtual?
Nope, just have fun. Very cool.
Do you have to be concerned about pollution in eating that out of this ocean?
That's why you have to wash it. The seaweed itself doesn't extract pollution like the bivalves do, so it's fine. All right, are we good? No questions? Thank you all for coming down. I'm really glad to see so many people. Nowadays, I don't get to see a whole lot of people and do a program live. Today, we got to do one live. Can you see how many people are watching?
I think you got 14.
Okay, in the upper left corner there, yeah.
Where it says live, 14?
Yep. So 14 people live, and I'm not sure how many Girl Scouts are here, but very cool. All right, so we're gonna sign off. You can hit the finish button. This is Ranger Russ signing off from Meigs Point, and I hope you all enjoyed the program.